So welcome, dear friends, to our first Engaged Buddhism Speaker Series here at Deer Park. This is a kind of movement to honor and highlight those of our practitioners in the Plum Village international community who are doing inspiring work, especially our lay Dharma teachers. And I'm very honored today. My name is Brother Faplu. I'm a Dharma teacher here at a monastic here at Deer Park Monastery. And I'm very honored today to welcome Dharma Teacher John Bell. So John is an old friend. He is a great inspiration for many monastics in our community. He met our teacher Thich Nhat Hanh in 1982 and ordained in the Order of Interbeing in 2001. And has been, of course, as well transmitted the lamp to as a Dharma teacher by Thai. He's been facilitating the Mountain Bell Sangha in the Boston area since 1997, offers retreats around the country, writes and publishes, and currently serves on the Beloved Community Circle CTC. This is an incredible movement to bring people together in groups to support one another, small kind of groups. I think there's 7 to 10, but we'll hear more about it from John, to really support our engaged Buddhist practice in the world throughout our daily lives. He formerly served on the Earth Holders Community CTC, the Arise Core Group, and the CTC, the North American Plum Village Dharma Teachers Council. And one amazing thing about John, if you learn about his background, he and his wife started this amazing movement and organization called Youth Build USA. So he's a founding staff and former vice president of Youth Build USA, which is an international nonprofit that provides learning, earning, and leadership opportunities to young people from low-income backgrounds. He's done training for the Peace Corps in Africa and South America, and he's an author. He just came out with a book just a few days ago. So we'll be hearing about that. And lifelong social justice activist, international trainer, facilitator, partner, father, and grandfather. Okay, I think the rest you can. So his new book, I think it was forthcoming and it's out now, right, John? That's right, Unbroken Wholeness, 6 Pathways to the Beloved Community. With no further ado, I introduce John Bell.
This is John Bellingham. Dear Thai, dear community, thanks to Brother Faplu and Sarah for inviting me and organizing this. Nice to see you all across the country. I'm calling in from the land of the Wampanoag people, traditionally now called Boston. It's a beautiful evening here. Thank you for giving your Friday afternoon or evening time to explore the feelings of powerlessness. I would want to hand it to you. It's not the topic that lights most people fire. So tonight we'll do a little meditation. I'll do a little talk about the idea of powerlessness and how we learned it. And we'll have a couple of breakouts where we get to explore these things in small groups and pairs. If we have time, we'll have some time for question and answer, all in an hour and a half. So thank you. If you'd like to begin with we'll begin with a small, short meditation. Just find a comfortable position, if you could. The Thai is very good at reminding us that meditation should be enjoyable. So find a position where the body is not distracting you. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness. We send our hearts along with the sound of this bell. May the hearers, including ourselves, awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. These are Thich Nhat Hanh's meditations on the great Bodhisattva vows. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. However innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply. However incomparable the mystery of interbeing, I vow to surrender to it freely. Dear friends, I'd like you to consider a question. If you were not afraid, what would you do for the healing of the world? Not a different you, not a superhero you, but you as you are. If you weren't afraid of losing the respect and affection of people, if you were not afraid of making mistakes, if you were not afraid of loving as much as you love, if you were not afraid of speaking your deepest truths, if you were not afraid of risking your job or your health or your wealth or your comfort, and what would you do for the healing of the world? Now, our teacher, Thai, forged his own courage in the cauldron of the wars in Vietnam. He and his followers, most of you probably know this history, were active in helping villagers rebuild after the bombings and providing healthcare and education, modern farming instruction for village folks. And in his latest book, before he passed, it was put together, also edited by Sister Hing Nim, Sister True Dedication. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's a beautiful book. But he says in there that we have in us an artist, a meditator, and a warrior. Here's what he says about the warrior. The warrior brings a determination to go ahead. You refuse to give up. You want to win. And as a practitioner, you have to follow this fighter in you to be active. We should not be afraid of obstacles on our path. Obstacles are not really obstacles. They are an accelerator of wisdom, of aspiration. So the idea of a warrior usually for us brings up images of soldiers and violent conflict and armor and military strategy. This is not what our gentle teacher was referring to. I think he's calling forth in us a set of qualities that are truly needed to face the challenges before us. And, these intertwined crises of ever-deepening climate catastrophe, persistent racism, assaults on democracy, an unjust economic system, a splintered society. They can't be addressed with passivity, resignation, numbness, or wishful thinking. So the qualities of a warrior, I think, are called for, but I think of the spiritual warriors fighting for liberation from suffering and for planetary well-being. And when I think of the characteristics of this kind of individual warrior, you think of samurai warriors who had a very spiritual grounding. They trained for years. They value discipline and precision and fearlessness and compassion. They cultivate a calmness and a centeredness, and they have to develop enormous trust in themselves in order to act with confidence and sort of an efficiency of effort. And as I've read, these kind of warriors are also willing to be vulnerable, to express their softness as well as fierceness, to be tender and open and unarmored, while also being direct and firm. And they have no doubt about their basic goodness, because in that moment of, conflict or confrontation, they can't doubt that. And their training allows them, I think, not to shrink in the face of their opponents or of suffering. And they can look squarely at fear. And I haven't been, but I've been told in Southeast Asia, many of the temples, Buddhist temples, are guarded by two statues. One is Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, the image of compassion, mercy, kindness. The other is kind of a wrathful and frightening looking visage. It's meant to communicate, I think, to those who enter that ill will and ignorance and delusion have no place here. And it kind of represents a physical force that protects the values and practices against corruption and impurity and things like that. And this is also the spirit of the warrior. And this is our potential. We have this warrior in us. However, I hasten to add that most of us, myself included, do not usually show up as warriors. So why not? I'd like to put a spotlight on feelings of powerlessness, since I think these feelings are often an unnamed obstacle to that warrior. Feelings of powerlessness interfere with our willingness to act on our aspiration for a better world. And we face an enormity of suffering. And when we look at that, suffering that's now present on the earth and will deepen, I think. We can often feel overwhelmed, despairing, scared, powerless, sort of understandable. And one thing that's helped me is to remember that those feelings of despair, fear, powerlessness that arise about all of these, what some people are calling the poly-crises, they were there long before I knew anything about those things. Because when we were children, we experienced so much that was wrong, things that were beyond our power to change. We were small and powerless. And when we don't have a chance to heal from it, and most of us don't, we internalize those feelings of being too small and powerless to make a difference. And we carry those into our adult years and project them onto the big social issues of the day. And so I think powerlessness is a huge barrier to humans mobilizing to limit harm and cultivate the world we want to live in. And I know there are many, many people right here and all over the world who are engaged in inner and outer work from a place of fierce compassion and solidarity or service. But it's also true that a more pervasive societal feeling is denial and distraction and paralysis about the situation facing us. Bill McKibben of 350.org put it this way. He says, crises seem so big and we seem so small, it's hard to imagine that we can make a difference. So how do we learn powerlessness? In my own life, a few things stand out. And this one starts early. It happened when I was a toddler. I remember it clearly. I wanted to be close to my mother. I was crying for her. My mother, who was generally a loving person, she placed me in a crib by myself, in a room by myself, to cry it out. She believed, some of the child rearing experts of the day, that you have to let babies cry it out so it strengthens their lungs. Don't ask, but that's what the advice was, and she believed it. So there I was in my crib. I can remember the afternoon light came in through the Venetian blinds and was making these beautiful patterns on the wooden floor. And I stood up. I couldn't talk, I don't think. I stood up and tried with all my might to move the crib towards the door. I cried and cried, used all my baby strength to scoop that. And I cried louder and louder. And she never came. So finally, I gave up, defeated, powerless, because I could not get what I needed despite my best efforts. And I don't think my lungs got stronger as a result. So as I grew, there were so many things that I knew deep inside were wrong, but I couldn't stop them because I was too small. For example, I couldn't stop my father from drinking or heal the hurt that made him drink. I couldn't stop the parents next door from beating their kids. I couldn't stop the bigger neighbor boys from pulling legs off insects. I couldn't stop the Catholic nuns in my grade school from making us children feel full of sin. I couldn't say how scared I was and confused when we had to get under our desks to practice for an air raid attack. Then, as a new student in high school locker room, I couldn't stop the bullies from picking on the weaker kids. And then my later teens in the 1960s, on TV, I watched helplessly as Black people were beaten by police. And then I watched those heart-numbing raw footage from the Vietnam War, and on and on. And you have your own examples, some similar, some different, because I think all seeing wrong things, violations of right relationship, and not being able to stop them is a pretty universal human experience. I mean, I think the truth is that every human baby who's innocent and pure and beautiful and sacred is born into a traumatized world full of suffering and oppression, even in the best of situations. And fairly quickly, that whole range of human capacities that we come in with that don't fit into the world, the other caregivers, our family, the culture, they get whittled down and stomped out and criticized, trimmed, so that we end up kind of having to give up lots of parts of ourselves. And we were too small to really stop it. And then we have 12 years of school in the United States, at least, and that rank us and tell most of us that we're average. So think of this. What's an average, miraculous human being? And then on top of that, you add sexism and racism and anti-Semitism and adultism and classism and all the issues, all the isms that tell us we're not enough, we're not worthy enough, we're not good enough. I mean, it's no wonder we feel powerless. And I think hardly any of us survive childhood and adolescence with our self-confidence, our sense of power, and our fearlessness intact. Now, we have to say, yeah, there are things that reinforce powerlessness. There are laws, there are state forces, there are structures. And many of us have been hurt or witnessed people being hurt when those forces were come to bear on those standing up against injustice. But we also know that collectively people have tremendous power. Like if factory workers walked off the job, if students refused to go to school, if communications workers shut down electronic communications, if consumers boycott products, if truckers stop hauling freight, bank clerks stop processing money exchanges, the whole system would come to a halt. So just to recognize that people have tremendous collective power. So I hope it's clear now how pervasive I think the condition to feel powerless is, and how that keeps most of us feeling small, keeping quiet, going along to get along more than we'd like to, not questioning authority because we're scared, settling for comfort and entertainment and distraction, me too, and accepting injustice, even not speaking out when we because we're scared. And sometimes conversely, we find ourselves complaining or blaming or criticizing others or acting out our discontent. And I don't think this is the way of the warrior. And I hope it's also clear now how important it is to transform our feelings of powerlessness so that we can release that greater agency, that confidence, that ability to make a difference that is in us. And that perfect storm of social issues is asking this of us, I think. And I think it's one key to individual and collective liberation. So I'd like to just share a few practices that have helped me transform some of my powerlessness. And maybe they'll be useful for you. One is, of course, what's oftentimes noted as the first of the eightfold path, which is cultivating a wise view as a starting place anyway. So by view, I mean, what is the story that we're telling ourselves about who we are and what world we're in? You know, for instance, I mean, there are cultural stories out there. One is that human beings are greedy and competitive and individualistic. There's another one that says that we're inherently wholesome and altruistic. The Christian Bible says God conferred dominion over nature for humans, and we can use the earth where we want to. Others, more indigenous, cultures say that we are inseparable. We're not different from nature. We're inseparable. We are nature. Tai says this so clearly. And we're asked to live in cooperative respect and kinship with the earth. And there's stories that we tell and we internalize, sometimes unconsciously. They affect how we think, speak, and act. And so they're worth exploring. What is the view that we hold? So in my view, one of the views is I try, despite outward appearances of any person, to hold the view that inside each person that I'm with, there's a miraculous, unbroken, beautiful being just wanting to be free. Our work in Youth Build with people who've been down a hard road, some pretty bad dudes, bad characters, created a lot of suffering in their lives and for other people. Inside was a beautiful human being waiting for the right conditions. And they responded to the right conditions. And I oftentimes say that by nature, not by conditioning, but by nature, humans are inherently worthy, deeply caring, enormously intelligent, immensely powerful, naturally cooperative, infinitely creative, and innately joyful. And most people roll their eyes when I say that and say, oh this guy's from another planet if he thinks we're like that. But I think that any other way that we show up is a result of unwholesome messages and experiences that engendered a sense of powerlessness. And so I also believe that those that I think are different from me, or the bad guys, are likewise inherently good and worthy of respect, even as I try to inhibit what they're doing that causes harm. And this allows me to engage, in civil dialogue with people, and it increases the chance of creating more understanding and possible cooperation. No guarantees, but it usually leads to reducing hostility at least. Another practice is to make a commitment to not believe my feelings of powerlessness. And it takes some doing. I mean, I have to recognize, first of all, and question every thought that comes up that says, I can't do this, or it's just too much for me. I'm too small, not smart enough, or strong enough, or whatever it is. So it's like using a gata practice. I can say things like, I can do this, or this is not too much for me, or yeah, let me at it. Sometimes I use a kind of an image that I learned from somebody else. It goes like this. Where does a 900-pound grizzly bear sleep? In a log? In a cave? Anywhere she wants. And you get a sense of the inherent agency and power in that kind of statement. Sometimes I use a lighthearted approach that I learned from an early teacher of mine whenever I was facing some challenge ahead of me. He would have me repeat after him the following. I'd say, I'm obviously completely incompetent and totally inadequate to handle the challenges that reality places before me. However, fortunately or unfortunately, I am the best person available for the job. And that usually made me chuckle and pointed out the fact that I've internalized wrong views, and so I can't do this. So another thing that's helped me is to, we get relentless messages to feel separate, drenched in these. And this reinforces feelings of powerlessness because we were usually alone when we experienced a powerless thing. So whenever I find myself feeling better than, inferior to, judgmental of, scared by, intimidated by, powerless in relation to another person or another group, I can be pretty sure that I'm caught in a reactive habit of separation. This is not my fault because, as I said, it's relentless. But these habits of separation keep us divided from each other and weaken our efforts to mobilize greater solidarity, togetherness in challenging injustice. So, I find myself using phrases like, I am intimately connected with everything and everyone. Or I use Thay's gata, I vow to wake up from the delusion of separateness. Some of you who have been in retreat with me before have probably heard this example, but one time I was waiting for a flight, in between flight at the Newark International Airport, and I found myself making up stories about other passengers. And they were not flattering stories. Oh, who does she think she is? Oh, he thinks, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I said to myself, John, what are you doing? You know nothing about these people. Please stop. So I devised a phrase, which I've used many, many times when I'm in like public spaces like a supermarket or a subway, a lot of people, and I find myself in feeling separate. I say, look around and I say, this is my home and these are my people. This is my home and these are my people. Because wherever we are in that moment is our home, and whomever we're with are our people. And when I do this, as it has happened in the Newark airport, immediately my attitude shifts. My judgment gives way to curiosity and tenderness. I want to know about them. I didn't go over and start, meeting every passenger, but that you can see that the switch in my attitude was very helpful. Another thing is to, I want to check the time here for a second. Yeah, almost good. Another thing is when I find myself complaining or blaming or criticizing, I can be sure I'm expressing powerlessness, feeling that I can't change the situation. And sometimes we can't, but so to get out of that trap, I've made a commitment to, for instance, propose solutions rather than complain, or to ask a person whose view I don't agree with to tell me, well, what brought you to that view? A commitment to refrain from demonizing anyone from any group, but to assume that they suffer and want to be happy just like me, and that we have more in common than in conflict if we can find enough, if we can talk and without reactivity. So these kinds of thoughts are really, they're in the right direction, but I've also found that they're not quite enough, that more is needed to loosen the grip of powerlessness, because all of that is almost like mental activity, and there's an emotional component. And I found I needed to explore the early experiences like the ones I named, the emotional roots of that in a safe setting. I've needed to recall those early messages, sometimes replay them, sometimes cry about them, sometimes get angry that they said that to me. Sometimes I bring some other imaginary person with me to do it. The main thing, I've had the blessing for the last 50 years almost of a peer counseling process, where for the last 40 years, every week, a friend and I get together, either at his house or my house. We split 90 minutes. He listens to me for 45 minutes. Then I listen to him for 45 minutes. No advice, no trying to fix each other. Just offering each other our undivided, respectful, warm attention. So in the safety of that protected space, I've been able to really explore and release the early childhood and more recent hurts, but the early childhood hurts that I talked about earlier. And so I've increasingly uncovered my innate capacity to care, to think clearly, to act more fearlessly, not done yet, but a long way from where I was. And this made me more effective in my social change, social justice work. And I want to encourage you, if you don't have some kind of listening partner, to try and develop that for yourself. You can ask a trusted practitioner or your partner. I use equal time because it really, you can start with 5 minutes each or 10 minutes each and work your way up to however long you want to do it. And it's just listening with undivided attention, not giving advice or commenting, just offering your presence. So to close out here, to review, I keep the wholeness of the other person in mind and the wholeness of myself in mind. I learn to recognize feelings of powerlessness as quickly as I can and then act in opposition or contrary. Like, what's a contradiction of a feeling of powerlessness? I've learned to loosen the grip by process through emotional release, this deep listening. I've also learned, something I didn't mention, I've studied those who have acted in the face of tremendous odds and succeeded, even when they were scared. I've cultivated the awareness that I'm not alone, even when I feel it. I don't have to do it alone. And I appreciate myself every time I refuse to act on my feelings of powerlessness. So the main message I hope is getting through is that these feelings of powerlessness are like a wet blanket over our capacity to think and love and act more boldly to bring about the personal and social transformation that we want. And now multiply this by 8 billion people in the world, and you can get a sense of the enormity of this collective obstacle. And then you also, and conversely, we can imagine the powerful upwelling of social solidarity and creative action and loving relationships that would be released by healing those early conditioned feelings of powerlessness. So I'd like to end by inviting us all to make a vow of sorts to undo and heal our internalized feelings of powerlessness in order to assume our full warrior nature on behalf of the world that we love, each in our own way. And if you feel comfortable, I'd like you to go back to that phrase that I used earlier as a way to end. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to think of a difficulty you're facing and repeat after me. I'm obviously completely incompetent and thoroughly inadequate to handle the challenge that reality places before me. However, fortunately or unfortunately, I am the best person available for the job. So, free from our feelings of powerlessness, just imagine what we could do for the healing of the world. Thank you for listening. I'm going to invite a bell.